This is Smelter, and it won't take just a few minutes in the game to realize what it actually is. This is basically an homage to a pretty obscure 1990 Super Nintendo game called ActRaiser. And ActRaiser was a really interesting beast because it was basically a completely 50-50 split in between relatively simple but challenging 2D side-scrolling levels and this top-down real-time strategy layer that you did in between the levels. And it's one of those games that was very well received, but also was never really tried again for a very long time. You know, gaming is a very iterative medium. We tend to see that all the time. We see when there's a popular game mechanic or an interesting new game type or whatever, it tends to get iterated on by a bunch of people that want to try to make their version of it. So it's very rare that you find a well-received and interesting and unique game mechanic that is sort of consigned to history, but there are a few of them, things that just don't really come around that often anymore. Very much like the Megaman Battle Network games, actually. You know, very well-received games, really fascinating and unique combat system, very successful to the point where there were like 6 of them, and yet that really neat combat system was like never tried again for years and years until just recently when we started to get games like One Step from Eden that actually try and make their own version of it, and they're really awesome as a result, but it took years for that to actually happen. So it's rare, but it does happen, and ActRaiser is one of those games. So Smelter is also split pretty equally between side-scrolling 2D platforming levels and a top-down real-time strategy layer that you do in between the levels. The strategy part makes you play as the Smelter themselves, which is basically a sentient suit of armor that you're wearing, which seems to work on kill-to-kill rules, basically. You're actually playing as Eve, trying to find Adam, so there is a bit of a biblical theme to what's going on here, but there's a lot of liberties taken with the characters in the story, and the story is actually pretty interesting. It's pretty well written so far, and the characters are actually, they make you care about them. You know, they're written in such a way as you want to see what happens to them, at least, which is not common for a side-scroller to have good characterization. You know, Hollow Knight comes to mind as a game with extremely excellent characterization, and this very much takes the idea that the characters should be something that you care about to actually keep you playing. But yeah, the strategy part takes place in a top-down, pretty large map, and there are these wells that you can capture around the map that allow you to teleport. Well, they're actually altars, but they kind of look like wells that allow you to teleport in between different areas because it's pretty big. But the way that the strategy layer works is in between the side-scroller levels, you will become the Smelter, and you will have to go around and capture territory. And you can build roads that allow you to capture a territory. You have to capture adjacent to the territory that you own. You can't just build in the middle of nowhere, so you have to build these roads and sort of branch out from there. And the overworld that you play in has 3 different sort of kingdoms, I guess you could say. They each have their own different element, their own different enemy types, and their own different hazards and things that you have to look out for. And you'll have to control your population of these things called zerms, which are like your creeps. And you have to build houses for them so that you can have more of them to do tasks around your territory. You'll also have to build things that supply them with apples, because of course, being that you are Eve and where you are, there's a bit of an apple theme happening, and you have to build enough food to actually supply all of your population to keep them alive. And then you'll have to build things like ground and air attacking areas, basically like barracks and archer towers and things that can actually be garrisoned by free zerms that you have available to allow you to help defend areas, because in each area, that particular area's enemies will spawn in waves constantly, and you have to be able to construct a good enough defense to actually defend yourself against them. Your Smelter that you're playing as does have a projectile that you can fire, but it doesn't do that much damage, although there is an elemental rock, paper, scissors system with the 3 different kingdoms elements that you can use to do more damage, but still the actual ground and air units that you can build are much more effective than you at single combat, and of course you can't be everywhere at once, so you need to build up these forces. Once you progress a certain amount, you can also gain more of these elemental shots that allow you to destroy some of these enemy spawn points and give you more territory to capture. And you can use this to capture other things like those aforementioned altars that let you teleport, as well as blessings. Every area has different blessing stones that give you different permanent bonuses, mostly for the side-scrolling levels, but some of them also give you bonuses for the strategy layer. And there are some other things you can capture as well, just specific buildings that do certain things that you might want to work your way towards. But then, of course, eventually, as you're going around and capturing and building on all this territory, you will find some of the various levels, these side-scrolling levels that you can actually go into to progress the game. So the side-scrolling portion of the game is actually most similar to Megaman X in terms of its actual control scheme. So you have a couple of very specific directions that you can attack in at any given time, as well as attacking in the air being kind of a limited thing, so you have to be careful to aim your attacks. jumps, which is a very Megaman X thing. You can also wall slide and jump up the same wall as many times as you want, also very Megaman X, and there's even a dash jump that you can do. Every element can do the dash jump, but one particular of the 3 elemental forms that you get has an enhancement to its dash jump, which makes it basically somersault much farther than the others. That particular form is sort of lightning themed and very much based around a lot of movement capability, so it makes sense. The first time you enter one of the kingdoms, one of each of the 3 kingdoms' main side-scrolling levels, you will have to activate these wells that give you powers and actually upgrade the overall elemental form of that area, because the elements aren't really elements so much as they're like themes of that particular area on the map. So that's why there are 3 of them, because there are 3 areas, and each one completely changes how you play, basically. And after you have obtained it once and complete that level, you can then shift between any of the forms that you've unlocked in any of the other levels. So that makes the side-scrolling levels actually pretty open, since there are generally multiple ways to take care of them, depending on which form you want to be shifted to at that time. The first one is a sort of an earth elemental form that has things like a double jump, the ability to deflect projectiles if you sort of parry them at the right time, or make yourself very heavy to fall through air currents without getting pushed around by them and some things like that, and also uses a 3-hit claw sort of short-range melee attack. Another form is the one that I mentioned that's very lightning themed. It has a much more longer range, sort of medium range really, whip attack. That's like a lightning whip that's pretty cool. It can also do the aforementioned dash jump thing much farther. It can dash into and up walls and even dash in the air, and has the ability to do a sort of lightning blink forward to avoid projectiles and other attacks that way, which is really fun. And the third form has a projectile attack, and it can even be charged. It works just like the Mega Buster effectively. It can also phase out of existence temporarily to go through projectiles, certain enemies and attacks, and also certain walls, so you can actually just walk right through them. And it can also glide in the air and use air currents to lift itself up while gliding. So each of the 3 forms has very different movement capabilities, which makes it pretty interesting, but also makes it a bit of you have to get used to the fact that if you switch forms, with all you have to do is just tap the triggers and you switch between any of the forms you have unlocked, that your controls are going to change kind of drastically, because, you know, being able to double jump 1 minute and then being able to dash jump really far another minute, it takes a bit of getting used to remember which forms can do what, and not find yourself accidentally trying to do something that another form does and not this one. So it actually adds quite a bit of depth to the side-scroller levels because you have these 3 forms, and in fact I actually recommend, since going to each kingdom is sort of in like done in a non-linear way, you can choose how deep you go into each one for a little bit. I recommend doing the first levels of each kingdom as soon as you can, so that you have all 3 forms' basic functions available to you at any given time, and you can switch between them to help the levels be more interesting and just have an overall more expanded tool set to actually tackle each individual hazard that you encounter, because the side-scrolling levels actually get very, very hard very quickly. The levels themselves are pretty good length, and they tend to have a lot of secrets and other just various bits hidden in them. You can find different kinds of upgrade tokens and the like throughout them, and in fact one of the things you can find are these trials. There's usually 2 or 3 in every level, and you just have to find the secret doors that lead to them. And once you've found the trial, whether or not you complete it, you can actually go back to an area in the overworld on the strategy layer that allows you to repeat any of the trials that you found so far. So that way, if you want to repeat one that you just couldn't beat at the time, you don't have to go back through the level and find it, which is a nice feature. But you have to at least find it once to actually put it in the tower. And they tend to be hidden all around the levels in various difficult-to-reach bits that you have to just explore around to find. So this game definitely does reward exploration with a lot of collectibles and other sort of upgradey bits. And when you complete one of these trials, you get an upgrade token that you actually use on the map, on the overworld, in the strategy layer of the game. You will find these other little altar-y bits to take control of, and if you spend one of these tokens, you can take control of one of them, and it will upgrade one of the powers for that region's forms. So if you go to the region where you got the form that has the ranged attack, one of the various upgrades you can get for these tokens is the ability to charge that ranged attack like a Mega Buster. These trials, by the way, tend to be very, very difficult. They are generally like high platforming skill challenges. Oftentimes you have to get to a certain location without getting hit or without getting spotted. That's usually the most common ones. And I will say that this is the kind of game that I have to recommend, despite actually not being able to get too far into it myself, because I used to be really into the Megaman X style of platforming, mostly because I played those games religiously as a kid. I loved them, even though they were very hard. But nowadays I find myself more enjoying the sort of Metroidvania-y Hollow Knight style of platforming. I like that a lot more, and I'm not so good at the Megaman X style as I used to be. I don't have the patience for it as much anymore. So this game's platforming gets really, really hard for me, and I find it to be like frustratingly difficult at times. Some of the levels just get insanely difficult for me, but there's nothing wrong with the platforming. In fact, it does that platforming style very well. So if you enjoy the Megaman X style of platforming, then you will definitely like this. You know those moments, and especially in Megaman X games, where the screen will auto-scroll and you'll have something like lava or something coming from the bottom of the screen, or some sort of grinder coming from the side of the screen, and you have to just keep platforming to avoid it? This game loves to do that, to the point where some levels actually have multiple different instances of that thing in the same level. There's one level in particular that actually has this rising and falling water that hurts you, and then it combines it with these instant death hammer things that fall from the ceiling, and these instant death platforms that jut out from the sides that you have to avoid, and then later on it combines it even further with this big grinders that's going across the screen. There are actually multiple grinders, and you have to sort of stay between them while avoiding the instant death thumper things from the ceiling and the water from the floor. This game really likes its auto-scrolling instant death trap segments. It uses them a lot, and I'm just not very good at that sort of thing anymore. There's nothing wrong with it, I just suck at it. So if you enjoy that sort of platforming, that very precise Mega Man X style of platforming, then this game does it to a pretty high standard, and it is quite difficult. It's one of those games where the combat difficulty actually stays pretty consistent throughout the entire game, only getting a little bit harder as you go, but of course you have more different types of attacks and upgrades by that point, so the combat is it's on a fairly gentle difficulty curve, you could say, but the platforming difficulty curve is very steep, and by the time of like the third major dungeons in each of the regions, the areas have gotten quite long and very challenging on the platforming skill side of things. So if you're into that, then, well, here you go. This will provide you with a lot of pretty high skill Mega Man X style platforming challenges that are fun and rewarding to overcome if you have the patience for them. If I had a complaint about the game, it'd be that the real-time strategy layer isn't nearly as complex and fleshed out as the platforming part, because in the platforming part you have those 3 elemental forms, each with their own like skill tree of various upgrades you can get for them and all the different ways to overcome different obstacles, but you don't really have anything like that for the most part in the real-time strategy sections. They're pretty basic. You can build 4 different buildings at first, and you do have elemental forms, but you get them more slowly than the side-scrolling character Eve gets them, and they don't really do as much. They don't have like a large skill tree of things that you can do with them. Instead, they're more they just change the color of your projectile that you fire, basically, and which of the 3 regions enemies that you do more damage to. Although I will say one thing that's really cool is later on you get the ability to upgrade those 4 different structure types, and you actually specialize them between 3 different upgrades, one representing each of those 3 regions on the map. They each have their own advantages and disadvantages, so I do like that. I think it's cool that the overall, like the whole 3 region system that seems to be very important to the lore of this world actually permeates both sections of the game. But yeah, that is Smelter. It's actually a really cool experience, because very rarely do I see anyone mention ActRaiser, first of all, and it's always a pleasure to see devs that remember that game and want to do something with it, want to make an homage to it or a spiritual successor or something like that, and actually do it really well, like this game. It's pretty competent, if a little bit simple, in its real-time strategy aspect, and it is very competent in its platforming aspect, with a lot of pretty cool features with the whole elemental alignment system thing, and the fact that it just gets very challenging. It does Mega Man X style platforming very well. I haven't really found any major problems with it. I think some of the enemy hitboxes might be a little bit weird. If they're a little bit below or a little bit above you, it can be kind of difficult to hit them in certain aspects, but it's not that big of a deal. And the wall sliding and wall jumping and all that works just fine. The controls are responsive, and it tends to do a pretty good job. Even though it is the type of platforming that I tend to find very frustrating and not a lot of fun these days, because I just don't have the patience and skill for it anymore like I used to, it's still a very good experience. And like I said, if you're into that style of platforming, if that's the kind of platforming that you like, then this game offers a very good high skill example of it. So yeah, that's Smelter. The link, as always, will be in the description below this video if you want to go ahead and check it out. It is $20 on Steam, which seems like a pretty good price for the amount of content that it offers. There's quite a few different levels and a lot of challenge trials, and there's that whole real-time strategy aspect, so it's going to last you for a while, and the campaign seems to be pretty well written and fun enough to actually make your way through. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.